committee meeting for the presentation of audit. We have Greg Evans, and I'm not sure if anybody else will be presenting. I will say the materials were sent out Friday, but I'm not sure everybody noticed, so I sent them again today. So speak to us like we're totally unprepared, although depending on who. That's all I got for an intro. Bring us home, Greg.
Okay. Thanks for having us today. I am Greg Evans from the Bonadillo Group. With me today is Keely Hines and Jacob Skevel, the two brains behind the operation. Just a little bit about the Bonadillo Group. We are based out of Syracuse, our team. We have about 120 employees in our Syracuse office, including 12 of us who are dedicated completely to working on governments. On the city audit this year, we had approximately 6 people work on the audit, so it's a good size audit. We had half of our team working on it, including some help from our enterprise risk management group, which are our IT guys, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. But they are also part of the audit team, and they help us evaluate your internal controls over financial reporting from the IT side of things. So we're going to talk about what we did, why we do it. We're going to give you an overview of the results of the audit. We're going to talk about some of the key financial numbers that we believe are important. We're going to talk about some findings that we had, and we should have plenty of time for questions afterward.
So in particular, he's going through, he's got the slideshow that everybody was sent to. So if you open the presentation, it might make it easier to follow.
Yeah. Yep. So we had an executive summary sent out by Amanda. Hopefully everyone got that. In addition to all the actual reports, which are very large documents, which would take us a very long time to go through. So we'll stick to the summary, and then if anyone has questions, we'd be happy to dig in deeper to anything in the financial statements. So what did we do? We did an audit of your financial statements. The key users of those financial statements are obviously the administration, the Common Council, rating agencies, your citizens, and your grantors. We finished that audit sometime in mid-March. It was due March 31st to the federal government. We'll talk about that timing in a little bit. We also did an audit of your expenditure of federal awards as required by the federal government. That audit was submitted and is available online at the federal website. We did an audit of your Department of Transportation funds from New York State. They require their own audit. And also that's available to both the federal government and grantors. The last document you have is a management letter. And the management letter lists some issues that we consider to be opportunities to strengthen your internal controls or processes, but not considered findings. So really, you have to consider those to be best practices. We won't go over that today unless anyone has specific questions about that. That's really meant to be, as it's titled, for management and kind of, again, to provide some just feedback on things that they can improve on. So over on page 3 of that summary is the results of our audit reports. The financial statements themselves are the responsibility of the city. The Bureau of Accounts, Dave Delvecchio and Brad O'Connor, have reviewed those and approved those. The numbers are yours. Our responsibility is to give an opinion on those numbers. Our opinion is that we believe they are fairly stated in all material respects, an unmodified opinion. What that means is that's the highest level of assurance that we can give. Had we proposed entries that the city decided not to book, That opinion might have come out as a modified opinion or a disclaimer of opinion. Those would consider to be obviously very negative. So again, unmodified opinion, we think everything landed where it should be. Another report we're required to issue is a review of your internal controls over financial reporting. We did identify some deficiencies that we consider to be material weaknesses. We'll talk about those when we get to the findings. There were audit adjustments this year, and again, those typically result in findings, so we'll go over that. We did have what we consider to be difficulties in completing the audit. This audit started in October and again wasn't completed until March. In my opinion, the primary reason for that is turnover in the Bureau of Accounts and their staffing level. So obviously, if you look at that document, the financial statements is well over 100 pages long. There's a lot that needs to be accumulated by the staff of the Bureau of Accounts to be able to produce this document. So it is a heavy lift, and you do need people that are experienced to be able to provide this information and at the same time carry out the day-to-day operations of the city's accounting department. So that is something we're required to report to you. That was the difficulty we had. On the next page is the results of the single audit. In terms of the single audit, we have to look at both compliance over federal regulations and also controls over compliance. I'm happy to report we did not have any findings on the single audit this year. I believe this is the second year in a row without findings on the single audit. Some of you that have been around a while remember a few years ago we had a significant amount of findings on the single audit. So I'm happy to report that the city seemed to have turned the corner on that particular piece of the audit. Also, with regard to that New York State DOT report, also no findings. Last year we had a finding where the city was paid twice on a reimbursement. I'm happy to report, well, actually it happened 2 years in a row. It did not happen this year. So again, positive note there. Right now, I'm going to turn it over to Keely, who will point out some of the highlights of the financial statements.
Okay, so I will walk you all through on page 5 and 6. On page 5, we highlight some of the effects having to do with the government-wide financial statements. So those of you that may not be familiar, the government-wide financial statements are on page 17 and 18. And those financial statements will account for all activity for the city as of June 30, 2019, regardless of the exchange of cash and regardless of whether those are long-term assets and long-term liabilities. In terms of the city's total net position, there's a deficit of just under $885 million. This is comprised of your governmental activities and your business type activities. So your governmental activities is just under $900 million in deficit, offset with the positive of $5 million in the business type activities. That $5 million is a lot lower than it was in the prior year, and I'm going to speak to that shortly. With regards to what's driving that deficit, it is mostly comprised of your net pension obligations for your New York State ERS, as well as your post-employment benefits. So in aggregate, your post-employment benefits are approximately $1.5 billion in aggregate, and that would include the city, SURA, as well as Syracuse City School District. So that's mostly what's driving that large deficit. The total pension liability is a net $32 million. That is the ERS obligation of about $52 million, offset with a pension-related asset for TRS on the school district. So what that means right now is, with regards to the retirement system, the TRS the investment actually exceeds the calculated potential obligations related to that. So that actually sits as an asset and reduces that overall net pension liability. As I had mentioned, that positive net position of $5 million in the business type activities. If you recall, or if you were to take a look at this year's financial statements versus last year, you will see one difference is in the presentation of the aviation fund. Previously, the aviation fund has been presented as a proprietary fund, as a business type fund. So if you recall, previously to delegating the running of that, the airport operation to the airport authority, the city was running that, and it was considered a business type activity because of charging user fees or end user fees to third parties. Now what's happening is the airport authority is taking care of that piece. And when we took a look at the definitions that GASB has outlined for business type activities versus an internal service fund, we found that really what's happening in that aviation fund fits the definition of an internal service fund. So that is when services and transactions are happening within the government as a whole. So because that airport authority is a component unit of the city, those transactions that are happening really mean that that fund meets the definition of the internal service fund. So what that meant was that we had to restate your beginning net position or your opening net position as of July 1, 2018. And that meant that your business type activities net position was reduced by about 72 million. And then that internal service fund now sits under the category of governmental activities. The city has net capital assets of about 890 million at June 30, 2019. And more details on that can be found on footnote page 49 through 51. And most of the increase in the balance of the capital assets is related to the activity at the airport, as everyone is aware. Moving on to page 6. So your fund financial statements in your large financial statement is found on page 19 through 21. So this is really where you folks probably spend more of your time taking a look at the results on a fund level. This is how you budget. This is where you'll see your general fund results. And again, all of your governmental funds in accordance with GAAP are presented on a modified accrual basis. So it only includes items that are due and payable currently, and is really, again, based upon your budgetary activity. So you will not see any capital assets. You will not see any long-term obligations such as your debt, your pension-related obligations, or other post-employment benefits. Specifically with regards to your general fund, you were budgeted to use approximately $11 million in fund balance, and the school district had budgeted to use almost 18 million in fund balance. You can see the details of those budgetary to actual comparisons on page 80 and 81 of your financial statements. In reality, your city's general fund only had a decrease of about 1.6 million, and the city school district experienced an increase in fund balance of about 3 million. So the city's general fund, in terms of budget to actual, had a net favorable variance of about $9 million, and the school district had a favorable variance of about 15 million. Sales tax revenue recorded in the general fund increased approximately $2.3 million from the prior year, and this did exceed the budget by about 3.6 million. And then your total revenues overall exceeded the budget by about 2.6% or 6 million. So that 6 million favorable variance in your revenues offset by your expenditures being almost 3 million less than what was budgeted is what's yielding that 9 million favorable variance.
So in terms of the fund balance, what we typically call the fund balance, is the best place to look like page 18, 19, or is it that page 80 that you're talking about?
Well, in the actual fund financial statements, so on that page 19 through 29, you'll be able to see the specific classifications within fund balance. So whether you have restricted fund balance, assigned fund balance, but if you wanted to just take a look at your total fund balance and what happened from a budgetary comparison perspective, then you would want to take a look at page 80 and 81.
So the number that we're always talking about, I think it's like our unrestricted fund balance. Is that more than just the cash and cash equivalents, the 35 million? Is it that plus another?
Yep. So let me just pull up the face here.
Yeah, so Tim, that's basically anything that doesn't have a restriction on it, meaning the council hasn't assigned that fund balance, the external grantors haven't assigned anything to that fund balance. So really it's about 44 million. That's, let's call it your savings account at the end of June 30, 2019.
And what's driving that total fund balance is taking a look at your total assets minus your total liabilities. And then
So that's like the
that
general fund column on page 19 toward the bottom, the 43.6.
Correct.
Okay.
And then, Tim, what you may find helpful is flipping over to page 7 of the executive summary. There's a nice comparative chart of what has been happening with unassigned fund balance from 2014 to 2019. So you'll see the last few years that unassigned fund balance has been trending up.
I'm sorry, which page is that?
Page 7 of the executive summary.
Yes. Okay. So that's the 40. Okay, 44. Yes, that's what I was saying.
And then page 8 is a nice visual for taking a look at your general fund revenues and expenditures on a 6-year comparative basis. And you'll see partly what's driving that increase in unassigned fund balances. You will see that that difference between, or that excess of revenues over your expenditures is continuing to increase and trend up. So in 2014, your revenues were only in excess of your expenditures by about 5 million, and you're looking at about 15 million in 2019.
So just for, I don't know if this is more of a, if Mary's on the line, but I think so the 44 million is the unrestricted fund balance as of the end of fiscal year 19. We're in fiscal year 20 because of coronavirus. We probably will spend the 11 million of the fund balance that we had. 11 million, I think that's the number, right? So then we're down to 33. And then this current fiscal year budget that we're all debating now includes like 13, 14 million. So we're down to like just below 20 million of fund balance if we spent all that money. Anybody?
Just to be clear, that $11 million was your was the city's budgeted use for the 2019 year.
Was it 8? Who was online? Was it 8 million for 20 fiscal year 20, or was it 11? I'm forgetting.
This is Brad O'Connor. We're last estimate we were about 8 million deficit for 2019 or 2020.
You're authorized how much use?
It was budgeted for. It was authorized for 11.
Yeah.
Right.
So okay.
Yeah.
So maybe it'll be lower, but okay. Thank you, Brad. Okay, sorry, you can continue. Thank you.
That's okay.
So again, those are, you know, that's a really important number with like you said, Councilor Rudd, with what's going on now. and the expected dip in sales tax, which, we will almost likely see a very large deficit for both the 2020 year and going into 2021. So that's what you're gonna use up fairly quickly, it would seem like.
If there aren't any other questions, I can turn it back over to Greg to discuss the findings.
Cool.
Okay, so page 9 of the summary or the findings, these 3 findings that we have here are all recurring findings. The first 2 go back a long ways now, 2010 and 2011. Number 3 was reported first in 2018. I'll describe the first 2 findings as more disclosure type findings and the ability to report in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. Number 1, we again did have to make journal entries. When your auditor makes journal entries, that makes the auditor part of your internal controls. By definition, that makes that creates a material weakness in the city's ability to materially report your financial position. Again, this finding's been around for 10 years now. I would say Nader always asks the number of journal entries. I can say that that's down about 10 from the prior year, down from about 25 journal entries to roughly 15 journal entries. Again, there are some positives there. We did make journal entries to the general fund, which is obviously your largest operating fund. That's a positive. On the negative side, these are things that keep recurring. Capital Projects Fund, we made a lot of adjustments to. Aviation Fund, although not as important as it used to be, as Keely pointed out, again, we made a lot of those journal entries so that your financial statements were not materially misstated. Any questions on finding number 1? I think, again, this is something that we've talked about for many years now.
I've asked this in the past, but what percentage of municipal governments typically have their auditor find things that should have been caught by their internal controls?
So that's a tricky one. I'll make the obvious comparison for you. We haven't had a journal entry with Onondaga County in probably 10 years anyway. And they're rare over there. And their financial statements are issued in roughly 4.5 to 5 months after year end. That's probably the gold standard in terms of financial reporting. And I'm not revealing any client information here when I say you can look at the city of Binghamton. Last year was the first year we audited the city of Binghamton. We did have a lot of journal entries there too. So, it's kind of all over the place. I think again, we are moving forward in terms of reducing the number of those journal entries. But the fact is a lot of them are the same. So, and again, the finding number 2 is related to capital assets and correctly reporting those capital assets. Again, in the aviation fund and some of the other funds, in the grand scheme of things, it's important in terms of your financial statements. It's required by generally accepted accounting principles, but certainly we don't believe there's any buildings missing or police cars missing or anything like that. It's a question of being able to record all those assets properly, book the depreciation properly in the correct period. So yes, it is a material weakness. However, I always kind of downplay this particular finding, but we are required to report it. So One thing I do want to point out there is, again, the airport authority is still maintaining the records for the capital assets related to the airport. You don't have a formal agreement with them to do so. They're not required to do that. Do I recommend somehow you get that in writing, that they're going to continue to do that? I think that's a good idea, just because, again, those are large numbers that represent a big portion of your capital assets. So I do think that is important. All right, so finding number 3 is related to capital projects. This one I kind of look at more of a management type issue. This is one that we've kind of honed in on the last few years. And really what's happening is those capital projects are being accounted for offline, essentially, for the most part, in a spreadsheet. We do believe that those numbers need to be updated on a regular basis in terms of the budgets for the individual projects. There are opportunities that are out there that you know, to maximize your grant funding related to these capital projects. Without updated numbers, that's tough to do. Sometimes projects run over. You may need additional financing for those projects. Again, when you're not updating those budgeted numbers, you're kind of flying blind there. And what happens is you do have an accumulation of cash in that fund that's being used to sort of front those grant expenses that are reimbursable later. So that becomes a timing issue. And the other thing is that's also funding those overages. So that's information that I think is valuable to managing those projects. But at this point, we don't believe it's being updated as regularly as it should be. And we have had to make a lot of journal entries to record revenue and get things in the proper period related to your capital projects. So again, most projects, you know, span over multiple years. So it's a little bit different, but at the same time, it's obviously a lot of dollars are going into there. And there may be opportunities for the city to basically maximize the use of that cash that is sitting in there right now.
So can I say it a different way for everybody and make sure at least one of us is understanding it? So our capital account, we often authorize money for projects. The money doesn't always get spent. So the money sits in the capital accounts. And then the money ends up front paying like things that would be grant reimbursed, which probably contributes to us billing the grants like in a less urgent fashion, which probably means we do it less accurately or even forget to do it or something. And then, so in the end, we end up with a bunch of money. Like we kind of mess up our own record keeping and have a bunch of money that we really should be pushing out of the capital accounts back to where if they want to spend it, they ask for permission again. And so, and I think that's in relation to what we're doing in this budget. There's I forget the number of million, but of capital money that we are pushing back up to use as like a one-time revenue so that this will happen less. I don't know if Brad or anybody else wants to comment on that, but.
This is Frank Kaliba. Yes, at Brad's suggestion and based on this evaluation, we are taking about $3.5 million in cash out of the capital fund, and we are not making a contribution in the fiscal year 21 budget. That's correct, Councilor Wright, for exactly the reasons you described.
Okay. Thank you. Go ahead, Greg.
I think that's it for the findings, unless anyone has other questions. I will point out too, so both Keely and Jake, Keely's new to the audit team this year. Jake took on a significantly more involved role this year. So the audit team has turned over, and I'm happy to report that we have the same results. I'd be a little nervous if we didn't, but I think it you should feel good about that in terms of the quality of the audit that you received.
Would you want to take a few minutes to go over the management letter and some of the comments that are in there? And how, I mean, I guess they don't rise to the level of material findings, but.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just open that up. Jake, do you want to start walking us through that? I think you probably have the most experience with most of those.
Sure. All right, so we'll start on page 1 of the management letter here. The first section relates primarily to internal control setup of the city. And our first comment here is mostly on documenting procedures and improving efficiency, primarily with accounting systems. There's some opportunity there to make things run more smoothly and reduce the number of manual entries, which could also potentially reduce the correcting entries that need to be made.
The only part when I read the first one is it says the recommendation is that we make an accounting manual. And I was kind of like, make an accounting manual? That's gonna fix this? But we don't, like, is that true? Like, we don't have like some kind of, I don't know. Could you explain that part?
Yeah, so what kind of happens there is there are a number of journal entries that need to be made to present the financial statements that aren't necessarily cash transaction related. Things like estimating how much of a receivable won't be collected, and those things need to be posted as a manual journal entry and require various supporting spreadsheets to be completed and determine what that adjustment needs to be. What currently happens now is there's instances where there might not be a great detailed record of how that needs to happen, and we identify inconsistencies at times throughout the audit as far as something might not tie back or not be updated. So the suggestion there is to more formally document some of those types of processes.
And I think part of what you've seen over the past couple of years is you've had some staff in the Bureau of Accounts that have retired, and it becomes difficult for someone to step in and follow, some of these transactions when you don't have that laid out, which again contributes to an audit that lasts much longer than it really should. So, and I think, Brad in particular can probably attest to that he stepped into a position where, quite honestly, with most government budgets, you don't have the ability to have someone come in a month or 2 months before that person retires. It's just not available in the budget in most cases. So this is the suggestion that we have here, just to kind of smooth over those rough spots when someone does leave.
Okay, Brad, make a manual.
I'm on it.
Systems East.
Yep. So continuing down here, these SSCAE type 2 reports are basically what your service providers can get as kind of a form of their audit, similar to this process, but more specifically designed towards internal controls. That's not to say that there are issues with their control operations, but it's one way of getting a comfort over the controls of these organizations that do have a bearing on the numbers you get for your financial reporting.
Would it be fair to say Brad should call the people who get our money and ask for their reporting of their own internal controls, and then we hold that someplace?
So there's instances, sure, there's instances of these where they might not currently obtain one of these reports. So that's one of our recommendations in there, is to just consider during the procurement process of inquiring about that. The next comment here, this was consistent with the prior year, the property tax software. As you all know, the new system that went into place a couple years ago doesn't have the full capabilities on delinquent taxes. So some of those are still on the old system.
So this is what gets, this is Bass, and then Bass is being replaced by Hamer. Is that the one, or is that, am I confusing it?
Yeah, this is on Bass, yeah.
Hamer will be able to do both, right?
I haven't looked at that personally.
I guess not you, but like maybe
Okay.
Frank or Brad. Hamer is supposed to be able to look at both old and new.
That is correct. Once it's fully installed and operational.
Sounds good.
Can I ask one question though, Frank? You said once it's fully installed and operational. So how long do we see that taking? Are we going to do it in pieces, or are we just going to put the whole program together?
Well, we've been rolling out the current portion, so getting the current taxes up and running, and that is very close to, if not fully complete. There's some bugs that need to be worked out in that, and then we'll begin. I would expect that. Our hope is that by July, the July period, that we'll have everything up and running, smoothly integrated and working. That doesn't, it has not been without some roadblocks and obstacles, President Hudson. So I don't want to guarantee that, but we've worked through most of those by now.
Okay.
Right. To continue on, the last of the internal control items here was just the city does rely on the county for some procurement items, and the recommendation here is again to just implementing a more formal process to monitor some of that. Again, there's no immediate causes of concern over anything improper, but on your end, the best practice is always to have a monitoring system in place.
So the only thing that flagged for me was like, seems like they're the bigger entity. It's almost like, we would never say that about New York State if they had, like, would we say we should monitor what New York State? It feels weird because they're like the bigger entity. But
You should monitor everybody.
yeah, is it? I guess it's because we're like opting to do our purchasing through them. It's not.
Right. That's exactly right. You're basically, you're outsourcing your purchasing process. So the comment is just, hey, ask them, make sure they don't have findings in their report, which I can tell you they don't at this point. But I would also ask for are there any issues that in their management letter that are maybe related to purchasing? So I would ask them to share that too.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, moving on to grant management here. This comment is really just about centralizing the oversight of that grant management. This can happen, as in the past it's been in very separate departments, and there isn't that centralized oversight. And again, it can create issues with reporting and requesting funds.
So we have a research department, and that they kind of oversee. I don't know. Is this just that like literally everything should go through that person, and there should be a formal designation of that person as having responsibility?
So the idea is to at least have one individual or department overseeing the whole umbrella of the grants and understanding the tracking and reimbursement process on these.
Okay, so Frank or anybody else, how do we feel in relation to this one? In terms of where we're moving or how we're reacting or what we were already doing even before?
This is Brad O'Connor again. We are looking for someone to fill that position. And Janet, it looks like you're on. I wonder if you could comment some more about that.
Sure. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, we have been moving towards that for the last few years, and making some headway. But there are still grants out there that we know about them, and we see paperwork come through our desks, but we do not manage them. In the budget for this coming year, we have a fiscal person that will be located in research, that will help us take on more of that. We do almost all the police and fire. We have a really good handle on that. But as far as the bigger grants, like the DPW and the engineering, and we really have not ever had anything to do with those. And that certainly is something we've talked about. It's just hasn't happened.
Okay. So no immediate movement on some of those, like the DPW engineering ones.
Well, we'd be happy once to try and take them on. I've often wondered how we'll continue to write grants if we become, there's only 3 of us in the department. So if we could be able to do both, but certainly we'd be happy to give it a try. And I think certainly the first step is bringing on a fiscal person.
What about, Janet, what about the idea, and I don't say it under the assumption that it doesn't happen, but what about the idea more of grant tracking? We understand that you may not have adequate staff and research to do every grant for every department, but at least the ability.
Sure. Could you explain a little more about what you mean?
Well, while you may not be able to, have the capacity to write grants for, let's say, every grant that DPW needs and the police department needs or whatever, but there should be or could be some direct feed from those departments to your department to keep track of every single grant they write.
Sure. There absolutely could be, and even just to the point of keeping on top and making sure that the reporting is getting done in a timely manner, and that reimbursements are being submitted in a timely manner, which has always been a concern.
If no other questions on that, we'll move to the next page, onto retainage. So this comment here is going to be kind of similar to how we described the finding for the capital projects in the financial statements of retainage. Again, is something that the primary tracking of it is happening in separate spreadsheets. And it's just, again, something where that tracking could be cleaned up. And
so it's like we're doing the one-time cleanup, but we should actually have a system that makes it so we don't accumulate a whole bunch there and have to move a big chunk, but so that it just regularly is accurate.
Right.
On that front, other than, so we mentioned moving the money, Frank, how do we feel about the long-term nature of making sure we don't accumulate the more authorized stuff than we need? Or Brad?
Yeah, this is something that we're going to monitor regularly. Really, there shouldn't be anything retained long-term. Once a project is done, we should know what happens to that retainage. And it either goes to the contractor or we keep it. Either way, we dispose of that amount somehow.
Could I ask a question, Councilor Rudd?
Yes, sir.
So we have all these grants out there from different departments, and this is to Brad, Frank, or Janet. All those different entities, they have a different person that keeps track of the grants, keeps track of how they're spent and money's dispersed and all that, and they have their own specific way of doing it. Is that what we're saying here?
I would think that would be correct.
So we want to consolidate, obviously, under one person, right? Is that what we're getting at? We're trying to...
That would be ideal, or at least under one department.
Well, I think
Right.
that's what
And
we're
I
saying
think
for the grants management, and then the retainage is to do with the capital accounts instead of the grant money. But yeah.
We want somebody to bird dog it, Tim.
Bird dog.
Each grant.
Right. And I think the auditors got it right under the grants management when they said that we should have centralized oversight. You know, I don't think that means, you know, the 3 or 4 people in research should be doing all of the management of the grants, but someone somewhere should have oversight over everything and really take accountability for all of the grants.
Well, my main concern is that I, just being a long time city person, I imagine many of the people that have done this are looking after these grants. I imagine they haven't been tutored in how to do it in one way or another. They're not, you know, they don't have a financial background, some of those department people, I bet. Am I correct? Again, in this?
Honestly, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that, Counselor.
And I think having one person, you know, kind of, or one department oversee that helps with that knowledge transfer. So again, as things change, you know, if you have a system in place of monitoring and requesting reimbursement and making sure that the grants are maxed out, I think that really helps, instead of having, you know, maybe a person in the police department and a person in DPW, kind of like you said, Councilor Hogan, of kind of doing their own thing. I think, you know, bringing that together will help with turnover.
Well, that's been one of our struggles for a long time, that's why we had so many discussions about centralization of multiple processes, this being one of them. It seemed like it wouldn't be, and you guys obviously can correct me, but it seemed like it wouldn't be too hard of a fix if you have all these various assigned people, if you will, that are doing grant tracking in the various departments. It seems that there could be, to your point, a centralized person to track all of them, you know, and to make sure. So, you know, if you have one person who meets with all of these people that are responsible for grants monthly or whatever to keep track of how they're reporting them, it seems we have a greater chance of getting control over it without bombarding research with so much work. I mean, you know, not trying to tell the administration what to do. Not necessarily, at least.
It's certainly a something that is doable.
Okay, you could keep going. I guess parking meter. So is that next?
So on page 4 with parking meters, this comment related to a specific bank account that wasn't being reconciled fully throughout the year. After the audit year end, a large transfer was made to clear most of that up. But there was still a unreconciled difference as of the time of the audit that wasn't material for financial statement purposes, but is a comment to ensure that that does happen for that account. The next comment here for parking garages. This again is a monitoring oversight type item. Again, there are instances of garages managed by contracts with third parties, so not directly run by the city. And the suggestion here is to have some process of monitoring those garages to ensure that there's no concerns over operations of them and their controls.
Okay.
The next section here relates to the Peoplesoft accounting software. All of these are the same comments from the prior year as far as limited capabilities of the system that we found. To just summarize quickly here, there were some loss of financial reporting that went towards preparing your financial statements when the shift happened. There's also some opportunities for tracking receipts of goods that isn't retained in there. And then with cash registers, with when cash comes in, the system can potentially lead to it being net down the activity. So there's just opportunity there to, if there was a way in the system to prevent these sorts of things, it would ensure that things would run more smoothly and would require less monitoring and less manual journal entries and oversight.
So Greg, you mentioned the Onondaga County comparison in their gold standard for not having findings. Do they have these comments? Because with our Peoplesoft thing is like kind of semi-shared with them. You know,
they do not. Although the platform is shared, the setup is not necessarily the same. And they also, you know, and again, it's a question of resources. Obviously, they have a consultant that's basically in-house that, you know, he's dealing with a lot of these things as they come up. So I think that's the key difference there with PeopleSoft is you need a good consultant, and you need a good consultant that's consistently present and not a new consultant every year, and someone that's kind of hand-holding the system, unfortunately.
so from Frank or Brad, from my bird's eye level, I guess I would, we have a contract to have this, we have the same consultant with the county, so why can't we ask for reports that get us out of that they do for the county that fit into our system? Is it just because our system, the things we're putting in are so different than what the county puts in that they can't run like similar reports? I don't understand this comment.
No, part of it is that our system is different. That's not the largest part of it. The largest part is it wasn't optimized when it was set up, and we've kind of Frankensteined the system together for 5 years after it was set up. So we have reached out to the consultant. We've been working with the consultant. He's already making changes for us. It's going to be an ongoing process. I mean, some of these issues with the setup are many layers deep within PeopleSoft. And so we are working with the consultant, and we will continue working with them to optimize the system.
Okay.
Councilor Rudd, can I jump in for a minute?
Yeah.
Thank you. Brad, I hear what you're saying, but I'm going to go back in history. There was myself, Councilor Bay, Councilor Maroon, and Councilor Hogan. And we asked these questions over and over, so I'm going to ask it again. How long is it going to take us to eventually build Peoplesoft out to where we have the ability to do all of the things that we need to do without losing money, to stop losing money?
Yeah. The short answer is it can't be done. We have, somewhere between 15 and 20 subsidiary systems, none of them fully integrate into Peoplesoft. That's the short answer. The longer answer is there is a lot that we can do in Peoplesoft to optimize it and make it more efficient and effective for us. And as far as a timeline, it's hard to say because we're still peeling away at the layers. And part of it is a capacity issue. We tried to deliver great financials to the auditors, and we failed. We were 5 months late. So we've got to do that and our daily processing and try to find time to fix the system. We've got people coming in to help, but it is. I know there's a lot of opportunity there to optimize Peoplesoft, and it is going to be a priority over the next 6 to 12 months.
Council President, if you don't mind me jumping in here, and I want to start by saying certainly not because of the existing administration and those involved now, but I swear, Council President, I was sitting here thinking the same thing, and on top of that, saying a lot of these questions were the questions asked when they brought this thing to us. We asked about its ability to be integrated in our systems, and I know Hogan and Nader certainly will remember. We took them through the ringer on this issue, and the previous administration argued us down that this gimmick would work. I'm calling it a gimmick on purpose. And now this administration has the unfortunate circumstance of trying to figure it out. And we knew then that it would be at a great cost. And
I'm gonna let you finish, Councilor. I'm gonna say they have to figure it out to tune of how many more millions of dollars.
Right. And maybe some consideration should be given to another route. But that was part of the discussion back then too. That's all I got.
Councilor Rudd, can I jump in?
Yeah, go for it.
So first of all, Greg, thank you for your presentation, and Jacob and Keely, welcome to the craziness. Councilor Bay and President Hudson are absolutely correct in terms of the Peoplesoft discussions initially. And not that I want to go back in time to be negative, but the argument that we tried to put forward before 5 years ago, I probably was the one who really mentioned this the most, was that at that point in time, the school district had spent $20 million on Peoplesoft, and the county, I believe, was somewhere in the neighborhood of $11 million. And we were looking at that point, an initial investment of a couple $1 million. And the counselors that were mentioned, myself, we argued that it was in that context of what had occurred with the university, with the school district, and with the county, that this system, first of all, was never meant to work for government from anything that I read and any research that I was aware of. I had several conversations with the school district because I was chair of the education committee at that time, and also with the county, and it didn't seem that it was the right way to go. So fast forward, here we are. Brad just mentioned the timing of the audit itself. Greg knows for me, I've been 10 years asking for the audits to be completed by calendar year end for the prior fiscal year. There's been several reasons for resistance with that. Here we are again. And again, this is not meant as any criticism of anybody at all, but context. So here we are again. The audit is filed near the deadline of March 31st, which is the federal requirement. These things have to be filed. It doesn't provide, in my opinion, the council nor the administration adequate time to prepare a budget for the upcoming year, not having the benefit of the prior year audit done in a timely fashion. And Greg mentioned also the issue of the journal entries. I've been asking since 2010 why we were having so many journal entries. I'm not sure even as of today, we're able to, through Hyperion or Peoplesoft, to get a budget to actual. I believe that some of that is still being manually produced. Here's my concern now in my new role as city auditor. When I hear the governor of our state stating yesterday that we're looking at a 20%, potential 20% reduction of financial aid and to the school district as well. And so when I looked at the audit summary document in terms of the charts that Keely mentioned, in terms of the trend of the fund balance, before I left the council, I had shared with the councilors the gap analysis that I had done in terms of expenditures and where we were going, and the trend that we saw at that time. And I'm very pleased to see that it's trending up, but now we've got another big hiccup. But the issues are, from a timely standpoint, that our budget department, our finance department, and even the line staff who have to do the accounting, Brad, I applaud your optimism, and I'm an optimistic guy too, but the reality of it is, I'm not sure that we have the capacity financially or the staffing or the expertise to be able to continue to use the Peoplesoft in the manner. Do you honestly think that we do, or we were able to pull this off, given the background that I just outlined for you?
Yeah, that background is accurate with everything I've heard. And no, we don't have the staff level or the expertise to pull that off with our current staffing. We are budgeted to add 2 new people to the BOA. That gives us a chance to throw a Hail Mary and get all of this done.
So adding the additional staff is good, but as Greg pointed out, unfortunately, many people coming in don't have the institutional knowledge. The commissioner is retiring and you're taking over that position, I'm assuming. And you're having a learning curve, I'm sure, too, probably a very capable person. But the reality is that in the IT department, they don't seem to have the staff to be able to do what needs to get done. Do we have the financial resources to be able to do it? I mean, are we looking at a cash flow situation for the end of this fiscal year and next year, given the potential of the 20% reduction, that the city is going to be in a position to get some consultancy services? And we've utilized a gentleman, his name escapes me, from the county, that's been, as Greg had pointed out, having the consistency with the consultants. But that's one person who works, I don't know, part-time with it. And we had another staff person who position was vacated before I came back to the city hall, who was working on Peoplesoft specifically. But I mean, even back to the time when the IT department came to us with the group for consultants, we tried to say to them, talk in the context that Greg and Jacob were mentioning in terms of vetting possible consultants. The council, again, to their credit, called the question in terms of those consultants. We went ahead with them anyway, and we continue to do that, whether it's Bass Tax or the IPS or Peoplesoft. We just can't afford to do that, in my opinion, and it puts the city fiscally in harm's way. Now, to whatever degree that the Office of the Audit, working with the external auditor and with the administration, I'm happy to do whatever that we can to help the situation. But the reality of it is, and I speak again after 10 years of this, that we just don't seem to be able to make it beyond the point where we are. We should not have our external accountant appearing before us today with this type of management letter recommendations, with the findings that were put forward. And to think that you all, it puts a hell of a burden on you all in the BOA and the IT department to be able to produce what we need to have in the way of fiscally responsible financial and internal controls for the city. I don't know how realistically it is. I guess I'm groping to understand how we're going to do that, Brad and Frank, financially. How are we going to do it? And staffing and knowledge base and the situation that we're faced with. I'm concerned. As a former counselor, as a taxpayer, and now as your city auditor, I'm really concerned when I read these, and you all know me, I read these reports, and these are the same reports I've been reading for a long time.
Yeah, all of your concerns are valid. And the first time I read these reports, which this is, pretty close to a copy and paste from last year, which was probably a copy and paste from the year before. First time I read them, I was terrified. And yeah, they're all valid concerns, and this is not something we should be taking lightly. It's not something we are taking lightly. It's not going to be easy. There are headwinds in just about every direction we look. That being said, this is what we're going to try to solve.
Well, again, excuse me.
Brad, sorry. Go ahead,
Nate. Look, we're in a pandemic situation, and there have been task forces developed for this within our county, within our city. I believe that we need an economic task force or a financial task force, an accounting task force, whatever the hell you want to call it. But there should be a semblance of people with knowledge base of city and government and operations, from the council, from the administration, from past people, whomever. We need to come together to look at this and figure out what our strategy is, the timetable to be able to do this. I would hope that we would not be looking at an audit again next time that is being done in March. It's just not right. And we need to have a real emphasis, in my opinion, and I'm only one person and I recognize that, but I'm trying to bring the benefit of my 10 years, 8 years, well, total 10 and a half years on the council, and now as our city auditor. This is a financial crisis looming, obviously, with what's happening worldwide. But here within the city, we better get our handle on this and not do a cut and paste next year as well. We need a commitment to putting together a group that's really going to address this and stop the charade with what's coming from the IT's ability or not ability to get this stuff done. You heard the councilors asking throughout these budget hearings, well, when can we expect this or when can we expect that? We owe the taxpayers better than what we're delivering, in my opinion. And again, it's not a criticism at anybody that's on this. It's just out of concern. I'm terrified in thinking about our city and the position that we're going to be in, let alone the layer of the pandemic what that's going to do. And when I hear the governor saying 20% potential reduction, I'm looking at this year's reduction budget for perhaps in cash flow, and I'm looking at next year's impact. And I believe sales tax, we've underestimated the hit that we're going to take on that. And so you look at those in combination and you say to yourself, what position are we going to be in? We damn well better get our systems in place.
I agree with everything you're saying. Maybe we can meet offline and talk about it some more, and I can explain some more to you about the direction that I'm trying to go.
Brad, this is Councilor Paniagua. Just as a way of a suggestion, you may want to contact the school district, Julie Golke, the controller. She can assist with how to change setups to Peoplesoft to make it more automated, paperless, and better internal controls. They're doing a really good job there with that. Just as a suggestion.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Sorry to take so much time, Councilor Rudd.
That's okay. All valid. Would Jacob, did you want to just finish the last couple quickly in the letter?
Yep, sure. I can cruise through these. So the last couple items here, one is related to the agency fund and some deposits that are received from contractors and held there, and just an opportunity to review some of those agreements and determine if there's a point in time when the city can take those funds as revenue versus holding them for return. That also was one we reported last year. And then the last item on here relates to cash accounts and just a specific cash account, kind of similar to our other centralized oversight recommendations, that there's an account held by the legal department that currently doesn't come through bureau accounts for reconciliation. And again, recommending that that centralized oversight happens.
Anything else that we should flag for the attention of the whole council? In
Councilor Rudd, I got just maybe somebody to make an opinion on the relative performance of the pension liability between the school district and the city side, as far as the ERS and I mean, I know the pension systems are aligned with each other, but they don't come out of the same pot. Is that because the difference in the way the performance of the pension fund, is that all investments driven, or is that like because of different union agreements? What would you posit on that?
Yeah, I think it's some of it is investments, some of it's unions, and some of it's those assumptions that go into those calculations. If you look at those, they jump around from year to year, and
Well, they're really going to jump around this year.
yeah, exactly. So, again, I always look at, not to make it too simple, but we always look at the contributions, and how they go up and down. And a lot of that is related to market performance. But, some of those wild swings that you see, they could be using a different discount rate, which I think they were at one point. So again, those calculations are just massive too. I don't know if Jake or Keely have anything more to add to that, but the actuarial calculations are just take a look at those footnotes. I mean, they're what, 10, 12 pages long. If one of those changes slightly, and we even show it in there, what the effect is of 1%, I mean, it's millions and millions of dollars. So it's really hard to predict that when comparing one union to another.
Well, I mean, there's a bunch of different unions involved, of course, on each side. But I mean, I just I worry about our pension contribution. I mean, once that bill comes in, we got to pay for it, and it's not going to change for us. So
There's no way that we survive that forever, obviously, Counselor, to the point of your question. You would think that, some consideration would be given to the old battle for support for unfunded mandates, but that conversation has not come up since I don't know what year was the last time we had those discussions in a very heavy way. 2013. There's been no request or no concern, no discussion with state delegates about those mandates that we're obligated to pay that we can't pay, that they know, not just us, but other municipalities can't pay. It's a bad model. And it needs to be adjusted.
I just worry about a Rhode Island type issue coming down from a few years ago that really was a lack of money to pay for pensions. So fortunately, I guess our state pension system on both sides is pretty strong, but I don't know how it is after what we just experienced. So,
Right.
Just a comment.
Anybody else have anything?
No, sir. This was very informative. Appreciate it.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you, everybody.
Councilor
Thank you,
Rudd,
Montefiore Group.
President Hudson.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time today.
All set. Thank you, Tim. Thank you to the auditors.
Have a good evening.
You too.
Take care.